Thank you, everybody. So I'm going to tell you something about, I'm asked to tell you about holistic view, developing the wages concept, just to say there's a whole host of processes that contribute to this. NitroPortugal is one. It's in an international context. The next one is a task force on reactive nitrogen of the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. The one after that, thank you. Which one's the other one? The one after that is International Nitrogen Initiative, and the one after that is an International Nitrogen Management System. So actually what you see we really do is not science, but logo invention. There we go. And not only that, but not only us, but lots of other people do logo invention too, and we work with all of these processes. So I would like to say first, before we get to the wages, is that this is back to this journey idea. We're each on a journey through science, through ideas. And I'm on one too. And this was my starting point to understand the processes and mechanisms of ammonia in the atmosphere, and then nitrogen more widely. Starting to think about scaling up. Going then to start integrating nitrogen disciplines. Developing what we can do about it. Of course, this is a first point to get to the next one. And then distilling the message and learning from society. And this, I think, is actually vital. That means that we don't just do science or science policy engagement, we do science policy press engagement. Because if we don't, then the world is not hearing what we're talking about. And then they all feed back into each other. So I think for me, this is a sort of journey. I'm not quite sure what comes next in the loop. So if you take, this is a science diagram, it may or may not mean anything to you, but I've got ammonia in the atmosphere, it's going in and out of the plants, there's lots of processes and mechanisms, I get very excited about that, and I'm not going to talk about this. You'll be happy to hear. But those kind of models have been useful to us, and then we have lots of different parts of that, and then we start looking at very complicated terms. This is not to be understood necessarily, but this is for you to make the identification of what is the equivalent graph in your own area of research, the graph that makes you and 3 other people extremely excited to say, did you know it's amazing that this was what the atmosphere would say, and the ammonia can't actually be coming out of the atmosphere, it can only be coming out of the soot, out of the litter, not the leaves themselves. So we get really excited by these amazing details, and we need this. This is the foundation in each of our disciplines. And if we don't have these foundations, we can't start drawing them together. And again, I'm not going to talk about this. Another example of great fun. This is science for party's sake. So we say to ourselves, we want to understand ammonia. If we make a grant application to measure ammonia emissions from a chicken house, we will not get funded. Because that's not science, apparently. But if we make a funding application to study ammonia emissions from penguins, this is now credible international science. It's actually not logical at all. But anyway, we get funded. It is an opportunity to measure what very complicated sources and things standing on cliffs and work out that we can actually make those models, like I was showing before, with measured emissions and model emissions performing very well together, and as a basis to scale up in the world where these oil ammonia emissions are. And we find out from this that if we compare our sites in the tropics with sites down here, here we're losing about 5% of the nitrogen. Up here we're losing 40–50%. And we've got this major effect of climate. And that effect of a warming world promoting emissions is not in any of the models. So here we are, Portugal, the warmer part of than let's say Scotland or the Netherlands or wherever lots of data comes from, may well have bigger emissions. So we've got, again, parties to have fun, to get the research funded, and out of that to improve our understanding that we can then put back into a practical context. And that actually, this graph is the percentage volatilized. So here we are, we've got less than 5% volatilized here and going up to above 50% volatilization in the middle. So it's something that really needs to be built into the models in due course for all the agricultural sources. So That's just my lecture on ammonia, and now I've got to move forward because I've got to start saying ammonia is part of this wider nitrogen world, and you might be working on water or ecosystems or soils or whatever. But the challenge we face is that the big flows coming in. The first big flow is the fertilizer manufacture. Then we've got the biological nitrogen fixation for the crops, for food, for ourselves. But the problem is it's incredibly leaky. So we're losing nitrous oxide, greenhouse gas. Nitrogen oxides don't just come out of cars, they come out of the soil as well. Ammonia, I mentioned, nitrates out the bottom. Once we put it through the livestock system, even more emissions. And the livestock are really mobilizing lots of extra emissions. And the livestock is something we need to keep coming back to. Because one of the things I found out is in Europe, 85% of the harvested nitrogen goes to feed livestock. 15% goes to feed people. This amazing number shows how important the livestock are. The cars, we can't forget, nitrous oxide, nitrogen oxides, and also some ammonia. Now, this is where the cascade starts. In the past, we talked about the nitrogen cycle. The emphasis was closely, tightly cycling pathways. And the emphasis in the cascade is that it's all leaking out in different parts of the world. So the ammonia and the nitrogen oxides start reacting to form particulate matter in the atmosphere as ammonium nitrate. My slides seem to have gone wrong. There are little trees here, apparently. But those ecosystems get saturated, and then the ecosystems have further emissions as they saturate with nitrogen until finally it's eventually denitrified. This is also a cascade of energy, because to convert atmospheric N2, it's a very strong triple bond, to break that uses a huge amount of energy. So 2% of world's energy is used just for this Haber-Bosch reaction to make ammonia fertilizer. So put in lots of energy, get it up to the top of the cascade, and as it comes down through here, it's dissipating energy until it's eventually denitrified back to N2. And that's why so many bombs are made from nitrogen compounds. So if you want a bomb, I'm not going to give you a lecture on how to make a bomb, but I will tell you, you should be advised to use some nitrogen compounds, because if you take some nitrate, which is nitrogen and oxygen, and take some ammonia, which is nitrogen and hydrogen, slam them together, then you get two nitrogens, and the oxygen and the hydrogen makes water. So, and that's the triple bond reforming and all the energy coming out in the process. So a bomb is a very sudden dissipation of energy, and the cascade is a gradual, stepwise dissipation, as all these nitrogen forms are lost out of the environment. And in a typical food chain in Europe, we've got something like 20% efficiency. That which we put in here, only 20% is finding it into the food that we eat, and 80% is ending up and lost in all these terms. So it's an incredibly inefficient system. So there's the challenge we face. We've gone instantly from me working on one little molecule called ammonia and having fun, to this nearly impossible challenge of all of those compounds. And if we're going to address that impossible challenge, we have to work together to bring each of our own home disciplines together and start talking in the bar and the pub and wherever on how we're going to join up those different parts of the story. And there's, if you can see those, they're a bit small, but lots of the different issues that we faced in the different forms of nitrogen. So let's just mention briefly this Haber-Bosch reaction. We used to live a fossil nitrogen economy. We used to dig nitrogen out of the ground in peat and in coal, and distill coal, and out of the coal would come nitrogen compounds, and the first fertilizers came from coal distillation when we lived in this fossil nitrogen economy. You haven't heard of the fossil carbon economy, but nitrogen was there as well. We had the fertilizer and the military needs, and this guy, he had the objective to meet the bomb needs for Germany in the First World War. He wanted to have a quick, decisive war, make everybody happy with a quick German win in the First World War, and therefore he managed to crack this reaction that they could then use to make the explosives. Of course, actually what happened was it prolonged the war. He was also the guy that invented poison gas in the trenches as well. He was a clever scientist. But anyway, and this was the guy who upscaled it, who turned it into a big fertilizer. So it's a basis for the Green Revolution, because they both got Nobel Prizes, and in his Nobel Prize speech, this guy didn't really emphasize the military needs so much. He emphasized the green revolution potential to feed the world. And you could also say it's the greatest geoengineering experiment ever. So, as Claudia pointed out, we've doubled terrestrial flows of nitrogen compounds as a result of this one single reaction. So, the changing of the world is huge as a result of that. So, what I want to do now is just indicate a few networks and our process of how to join things up. And that process can inform us not much on the science, but how our minds work. And as you think about that, then you can start criticizing it in your own head and think, where should we be going in the future? How can we do better? So we started with a big EU project that was 17 million euros, great, 64 institutes, and it was on nitrogen climate. We managed to win a network in Europe called Nitrogen Europe. And there was cost action as well. These are integrating facilities of people getting them working together. And what we decided to do was start working towards the first European nitrogen assessments. You've heard of the climate assessment reports. We wanted to do one for nitrogen. And then we should ask, what would that look like? What should we bring together? The International Nitrogen Initiative was a network, and they had the Air Convention all working together in this process and feeding in to the United Nations. And there's another thing there, the Global Partnership on Youth Management. We've got a flow of science process through its application. The first thing I found out about this as it developed was it was a bit like a pyramid. That we had many, many institutes working on this underpinning science. But when it came to the science synthesis here, only a few of them wanted to take part. So we had, let's say, 17 million here, 1 million here in the science synthesis. But when it came to the science policy application, we had even less in this task force on reactive management, even smaller amount of people, only very small fraction of this huge pool of people wanted to be here. Until finally with the UN, actually we just a handful of scientists. And that seems to me that we probably had that wrong. We need to motivate people somehow to think across the whole chain, because this can also feed back the agenda of what our process level science is. The ultimate top of the pyramid was economics. And we were in Geneva, and they were thinking about a new protocol linked to nitrogen, and I needed to persuade people to work on what is the cost of ammonia pollution for Europe, and I had one man and a dog working at the weekend. And I'm not sure which was more productive. But anyway, surely we should be changing the shape of our pyramid on that. So let's get the big idea about this, where we're going with this, that humans have produced this hidden force with multiple effects on society. Without it, half the world's population wouldn't be alive, according to current diets. Web of environmental pollution, and we need to understand the system better to develop more integrated solutions. And that's where we're sort of going. We produced this European nitrogen assessment, and I'll show you various graphs from it. And we worked to get the press messages out as well. And here we are, this an indication of some of the press reactions. This was an interesting one because you see, they wanted to bring climate change in because that's what people have heard about, but it wasn't a climate change debate at all. But nevertheless, it's still press. All news is good news because it's raising awareness of the topic. And we managed to get lots of coverage, a summary in Nature, and there's even a 4-minute video, which if you go into YouTube and type European Nitrogen Assessment, you get the whole book of 500 pages distilled into 250 words with music. And that's an art form. My colleague Claire Howard has a lot to be thanked for achieving that. And you can ask yourself, play it 2 times. Play it with the whole thing with the music, and then turn off the music. And it's rubbish without the music. But it just shows you the power of communication tools to be aware of things. Okay, so the objectives of the European Nitrogen Assessment to review the scientific understanding of where it's coming from, what it's doing, what the interactions, considering the context of the policies, the costs and benefits, inform the future policies. So quite practical. And so let's just start with the Nitro Europe, nitrogen and climate goal. And here we are getting our heads around how we can do this integration. Because at this point, we haven't got our heads around integration yet. We're struggling with it. So we start with the greenhouse gases. Methane, ammonia, N2O, NOx, CO2, there's interactions of all of those with a greenhouse gas balance. The ammonia is not a greenhouse gas, but its flows affect the nitrous oxide, which is a greenhouse gas. Then we've got lots of other things: emission, deposition, fertilization, fixation, denitrification, leaching. That's the core of Nitro Europe. And then we've got all sorts of other things happening. The aerosol, the ozone in the atmosphere is produced as a result of reactions with nitrogen compounds. The aerosol, the particles in the atmosphere contain nitrogen. There's organic nitrogen, inorganic nitrogen is getting more and more complicated. We've got issues of habitat-sensitive ecosystems, species loss, groundwater pollution. You see we're sort of getting our head around these challenges. Well, we keep that graph and then we keep pushing on. Here's another shot. And this was much less scientific, but this aim was, how do we bring these together? So what we did, we made a big long list and said, why should the world care about nitrogen? We came up with a list of 21 good reasons to care about nitrogen. But we realized that 21 was too many. So we boiled it down, we got it down to 9. And 9 was really great because you get an acronym out of it, which is Nitrogen in Europe. And there's the project. And we even get, if you look at these very, very carefully, you get a kind of integration concept. And that gives you act as group. So we're thinking about integration. And there you can read all the 9. And it's a step forward, and it worked well for the logo for the project. But still 9 is too many. We can't quite communicate with 9. So that didn't quite stick. And now for the small interlude, at which point you think this is completely loopy and no practical use whatsoever. And that may be the aim. Because we need to do completely loopy things which are no practical use whatsoever, because out of those will come interesting things. So I said to myself, how can we link all these networks together in a visual concept, which is no practical use? And so first I started with that, and then I decided I had to change it. So I have Nitro Europe, that's our acronym for our project. I've got 9, which is Nitrogen in Europe. I've got the European Nitrogen Assessment and the International Nitrogen Initiative, and you can see this is a very long aeroplane flight. And then we've got them all fitted together. I was so happy with that. But I was still missing the cost action, cost 729. Well, there's 7 there, there's 2 there, there's 2 and 7 makes 9. So this, as you can see, this is no practical use whatsoever, but it does serve a purpose to show that we have to be imaginative in making links in ways we didn't think before. So, and in being imaginative, this is where we came up with this one, which is then the wages one, which is stuck better than the others, because 5 is smaller than 9, it's easier, got 5 fingers, and water, air, greenhouse ecosystems, soils. Lots of good reasons to think about nitrogen. Those are the big issues we know about already. And for people who like really obscure things, what you should notice is there's also a model of the Greek elements. So we have fire at the top, water at the bottom, earth on the right, air on the left, and the quintessence is biodiversity in the middle. So we have, the fun continues. What will be the next model is probably for you to invent. But we always need a new model because it's always a refreshing of the ideas as we go forward. So what were the kind of things that European Nitrogen Assessment came up with? Big practical maps. And that's, of course, wonderful NOx emissions. You can see, there we are. You see, by the way, Portugal down here looks relatively clean. There's some hot spots there, but obviously much worse over here. But there's no reason for complacency there, because particularly the levels that people are exposed to in cities may be above health thresholds. And of course we know the combustion sources. We also know the whole challenge about the vehicles. Remember the Volkswagen story was about engine management systems because they couldn't get to the standards that basically were being promised. So as we've gone further with NOx emission reduction, that's a big challenge. One of the things that's come out for this for me as well, as we talk about NOx in the world, is that there's 40 million tons of NOx, nitrogen. And we shouldn't just think about that as pollution, we should think about it as resource. Because at $1 per kilo of nitrogen, that's 40 million worth of dollars of pollution, $40 billion of pollution a year, which we could start to learn to harvest rather than just destroy. We've got the ammonia emissions from agriculture. Again, this is the area where we think these may be underestimated in Portugal. This is a discussion we're now having because it's warmer here. So the southern area here may need to be more red, and the northern area may need to be more green. The nitrous oxide, the greenhouse gas, and nitrogen input to aquatic systems in the waters. Now these are lovely maps, and they're great if you want lots of time and you want to look at where your country sits, etc. But nevertheless, they're, of course, what we need to produce, but not the only thing. And we need to produce risk assessment maps. And this, I don't like this map at all, actually, by the way. You can study it and see whether you like it or not, but it tells you very clearly risk of eutrophication for fresh waters. The yellow's got a high risk, and here we are in Portugal, it's got a high risk, but it doesn't tell me whether it's got a very high risk. It's boring colours. The colours are really important in map making. And is that really going to mobilise action? I don't think it's going to mobilise action. So what would mobilise action? And now you're going to tell me that the next slide is completely unfair. But it is unfair, but it's also true. I think this is a slide that mobilises action. So this is at the Beijing Olympics. And there was a big discussion about whether this was pollution or not. And some said, no, it's not, it's all to do with fish farming. But there was fish farming using the nutrients that are coming down the rivers, but those nutrients, of course, are then growing at incredible speed, and then had lots of people to clear this algae from these areas. So it's not always going to be as bad as this, but that's a million miles away from a clean situation, and there's clearly reasons to take action in Europe as well as in Asia. Now, on to air pollution. That was a bit on the water. I think this is called industrial beauty. This picture is called industrial beauty, by the way. I hope you can enjoy the beauty of industrial beauty. But of course, pollution doesn't always look like that, and we face new pollution challenges, and this is how pollution may look more nowadays. The point of this photograph is that this is not actually Palma, it's a village nearby. The crisp tree and the hazy town. The fact that it's hazy is submicron aerosols. So the ammonia's gone up, the nitrogen oxides have gone up, they've reacted together to condense as ammonium nitrate particles and ammonium sulfate particles, and they give you light scattering, so you don't have the visibility you would have had. Now, I'm told that in North America, and we have Jill here, that people are actually rather concerned about visibility and have been over the years. We don't care about visibility here, Jill. Well, that's good, we should. Okay, but what we do care more about is the fact that these particles may be threatening our health. And there's a lot of data showing that air pollution is a huge threat to human health, that nitrogen is a big part of that, and the way the epidemiology is done in total mass. So nitrogen pollution is contributing as a threat to human health. In fact, there is a research question still that's not cracked, which is one particle worse than another, depending on the chemistry? Is a black carbon particle worse than a nitrogen particle? That is still not cracked. But nevertheless, at the moment, the nitrogen is contributing to the total burden. I tend to think, the reason I've circled this, and this is for Italians in the audience, because this is the capital of air pollution for Europe, the Po Valley. It's really still air build-up of pollution from traffic and from cars. Also think about it in terms of your food products. So Parma ham, the wine from Reggio Emilia is of course from fertilizers, and then you've got your the cheese as well, Parmesan cheese. All of these are nitrogen products accompanied by pollution. So the question is, are the best methods being used to reduce the pollution? And the answer very quickly is no. So more can be done. Let's just say, what about where we're going with air pollution and nitrogen? And start with the sulfur first. These are emission reductions that have been achieved since 2000 to 2020. And the blue is Europe, and the black is the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, which also includes Eastern Europe and Central Asia. So sulfur dioxide has reduced a lot. Big progress with the nitrogen oxides. Would have been even better if we hadn't increased our car use. Particulate matter, some progress. VOCs. So the one we should be worried about is the one I started with, which is, that's the amount of progress that's been made so far. Like, this is Cinderella. the one that doesn't get to go to the ball of air pollution control. And there have now been agreed targets in a revision of what's called the National Emission Ceilings Directive, and that was just agreed in December last year. Those are still pretty modest compared to the other gases. So there's a big challenge there. The SO2 is a success story, job nearly done, more to do with nitrogen, in particular the ammonia, which is in particular coming from agriculture. So there we are, the Gothenburg Protocol agreed a 2% decrease. That's a bit of an embarrassment, really. And I'm very happy to say that Brussels has gone a bit further. Now, what can we do as scientists into this game? And one of the things we've been doing through this task force on reactive nitrogen is providing evidence for the policymakers and tools for the countries. And this is one of those tools. It's called Options for Ammonia Mitigation. It's a guidance document that all the countries can use. And you get 100 pages, but out of it you also get a top list of the top 5 of what should you really do, in this case in ammonia. Spread your manure better on the fields. Feed your animals more optimized diets. Less in, less out. Cover your stores for manure. Start doing farm balances on demonstration farms. We weren't brave enough to say on all farms. You could say on all farms. We just said, let's start with the demonstration farms. And then finally, better housing systems. The reason to start at the top is this is the cheapest, and it's also where you see immediate benefit. Because if you put better manure on your fields, you're going to get a better crop response and start seeing the opportunities. And just to give you then my favourite there, which is this low emission manure spreading. This is the typical way we spread out manure in UK at least, 1950s technology, and yet there's all these different methods available of more precise farming, where you put it out, just dribble it into rows, so there's much less area and much more evenly spread for the crops. Or have a foot that scrapes along the surface and puts it under the vegetation. Or if you're really enthusiastic, actually inject it into the soil. So I would say there's a comparison here. I've put the car and exhaust pipe at the bottom. If you think about your car, you wouldn't drive your car without an exhaust pipe. And yet, in agriculture, we're still living in this world where it's socially acceptable to drive your tractor without an exhaust pipe equivalent. The bolt-on technology, which has been available for 70 years, is still in most farms in Europe not being used. So I think this is a social question as much as a scientific question. Now, here's another issue about communication, because I'm going to give you 2 graphs. This is the hard one, and that's the one for really patient people who read the European Nitrogen Assessment. And basically, it tells you that nitrogen's having warming and cooling things. A red means warming, and a green means a nitrogen part of the warming. So nitrous oxide is warming the climate, as is CO2. And there's some other effects here. Ozone effect is warming. On the other hand, the blue and the dark green is all the cooling effects. At the end of that, we end up with an awful lot of work going in to show that, on the whole, nitrogen is cooling. So should we have more nitrogen? Well, actually, that's not the message we want to give. The problem we face is that this has got a very long lifetime, and these have got very short lifetimes. So actually, if we're going to have this one, we still need to get rid of that. And meanwhile, then we face a problem because these sulfates and nitrates are the same ones that contribute to air pollution. So I'm going to give you a different version of this. Again, that's how to respin our information, and you get a simpler version. But basically, we've got 2 main cooling effects. Fertilize the trees, they'll grow better, take more carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. So that's a cooling effect. The problem with that is that that's associated with health and biodiversity costs, because our biodiversity is changing, and these are our best estimates of biodiversity costs. The particulate matter is also cooling, but the particulate matter has got these health costs, the breathing in. The warming, the climate cost is actually one of the smallest compared to those other costs, and we've got an effect on tropospheric ozone. So in the end, we don't actually, they're all bad. We don't want more nitrogen in the environment. The trick, I think, is to go towards a more efficient system where nitrogen is where we want it, that you put it on the crops where you intend it, and you don't leak it into the environment all over. So I think those are the issues for nitrogen climate. It's not just about greenhouse gases. There's warming and cooling effects where you change the amount the trees grow, or you change the aerosol affecting light scattering. It's quite a diverse and complex system. I want to just go on to the biodiversity one, and the big challenge we face with biodiversity is the issue of scale. So this is an old map, but it's one of the map of where are the areas at risk for biodiversity under nitrogen deposition. And you see a big map like this. If we zoom in, and this is part of the UK, you see there's a huge load of structure into that. And if we zoom in again to a little landscape, again we've got a huge structure. So this has got a real challenge for us as we think about nitrogen biodiversity, because if we made a Europe-wide policy, that says we're going to reduce emissions by 10%, that might look better on this map, but once we get down to the local level, we're still going to have local exceedances. So I think one of the challenges, and I'm sure there'll be more discussion and talks on this, is how should we think about landscape structure, particularly because some of the nitrogen pollution is coming from the rural environment adjacent to the ecosystems. So we have to think about how to handle landscape structure. Just to give you a few pictures, now again for a rest after too many graphs, what does nitrogen deposition and ecosystems and biodiversity loss look like? This is a farm in Northern Ireland, and downwind of the farm is a peat bog, a natural ecosystem with heathland and sphagnum mosses and lichens. And the farmer had put a farm there without permission, and then he'd stopped it without permission, and then he'd really annoyed the pollution agencies until finally, you know how it is in the pollution agency here, patience was lost and they prosecuted the farmer. Well, there we go, that's how it is. It made a very interesting case to see dead plants. And this is, first of all, this is a lichen, it's called Cladonia. If you look carefully at the colour, that's blue-green, and this is white, pinky white. That's alive, and all of that is already dead. So the ammonia first come out of the chicken house, blown across the nature reserve, come down. The high concentrations of nitrogen ammonia have killed off this plant, with only that little bit surviving. Now, what will happen next is the whole thing will fall apart. That's another specimen, and that will be, still in the process of decay. And then 2 or 3 years later, there'll be nothing at all, completely wiped out. These Cladonia wiped out from the site. So that's one site, an example. Here's another one from the same site. The sphagnum is, of course, the thing that is leading to peatland to grow, to build up carbon, to sequester carbon as great carbon stocks. Here's a healthy-looking sphagnum hummock. And then what happens is algae starts growing all over the sphagnum moss, and suffocating it until the algae completely takes over, and that's gone as well. And what we see after this site, after a while, is just destroyed plants, looking awful, and where there's sphagnum in pools, just dead, empty pools. Here's another one. This is what the tree in Northern Ireland should be looking like, covered with a rich biodiversity, and that's what it looks like near the farm. This is extreme example, thick blooper, you can slide all the algae off up with your finger as you slide on that tree. The really good news is, not for the farmer, but for the nature reserve, is that the farmer ultimately did do a deal with the nature agency, and he committed to a 95% pollution mitigation by having the latest top-notch expensive technology in acid scrubbers for his chicken house. But in the end he couldn't pay for it, and his farm went bankrupt. Well, that's bad for the farmer, but after that experience, nobody had that much sympathy for him. But what did happen is we now have 7 years worth of recovery. So the next question is, if you stop pollution, will the site recover? And many ecologists have told us for peat bogs, they will not recover because the nitrogen is just going to carry on sitting there, and it will take many, many decades for recovery to occur. And our evidence from this site is that's completely not true. We do still see cases like this. This is taken this spring, of slimy sphagnum hummocks. But what happens as it gets cleaner is the sphagnum can get going again, and there's a fight going on. Who's going to win the battle? The slime that's over this hummock or the sphagnum itself, that will start growing and then start growing faster and faster, and then cover over the top of the algae until you get a nice fresh hummock of the species back again. That's Just to say then that this site is, well, you probably say 50% recovered in 5 years. So it really is worthwhile cleaning up afterwards. I'm going to go then now on to integration and bringing these things together. And one of the ways we bring things together is by the flows. What are the big flows? What are the big opportunities? So this is from the European Nitrogen Assessment, the major nitrogen flows in Europe. Blue is what we planned to do in agriculture, so these are in millions of tons, it doesn't say it should do. Millions of tons of nitrogen coming in, that's the big flow. Crop fixation is small in Europe. Here, that's quite a small one. And we've got the traffic source of NOx as well. The yellow is everything we didn't plan. Now, the buttons here are where you can take action. So one action you can do is manage your crops better, or manage your manure better, or your livestock better. There's whole different opportunities here. This is one I particularly like because it's our food choice. This is us. Are we, as people, going to eat animals or plants, or how much of the two? Because as I said, from this diagram, 85% of this primary productive nitrogen is going to feed livestock. Only 15% is going to feed the people. You see that? So that makes this an incredibly powerful driver. So I'll come back to that in a second. Here are the 7 key actions that we can take to reduce nitrogen losses. And of course that's crossing a whole load of different disciplines of people's area of action. Oh, and I lost that. There we are. Energy and transport savings and our food choices. And just to put it in simple for farming, more efficient nitrogen use is going to save farmers money if they can do it well while reducing those different threats. So we now took this forward, the European Nitrogen Assessment, with a special report that came afterwards on what about the food choices. And this, I think, is a very exciting one because it's so powerful. You can get lots of numbers here. I'll go through that very quickly. This is our input proportion of diet. This is a 50% reduction scenario with a Demetarian being half meat consumption. Compared with our recommended mean daily intake for red meat, we've gone from 207% to 107%. So we were eating in Europe twice what we needed of the red meat, according to World Cancer Research Programme. So we're actually going down to a apparently more healthy level. Then we find out that we've got a huge area of Europe that's not needed for farming anymore because we don't need to eat so much because it's not feeding so many livestock. So we have to have 2 sub-scenarios of what to do with the land. Imagine that we grow more grain for export, or we have a greening scenario. And here are the losses. So nitrogen losses down by 40%, ammonia losses down by 40%, nitrate to water down by 40%. So these are huge reductions. The interesting thing is, these are the kind of numbers you can achieve with the maximum level of technical measures, or maximum ambition that people agree to. So it shows that what we can do technically in farming is comparable to what you might do in society, depending on how ambitious we are. GHG emissions. This is an important one. Nitrogen use efficiency of the food system in Europe, currently running at 22%. This would double the efficiency of the system to 14%. Our soy imports go down massively, 76%. Our cereal exports go up, and we can also produce substantial amount of bioenergy. So there's a question about how far you can go with this. Would you want to go as far as half? Would you want to go further? You can't go completely far because the system becomes non-linear if you go too far. But it shows the importance of that. And it also shows the importance of a conversation with the public, because when we launch this, then we get the press. And if I try to have a conversation with the press about manure spreading technology, there's not many newspapers want to talk to me, funnily enough. Nobody wants a news article on manure spreading technology. But if I talk to them about the food choice in Europe and say, well, if we ate differently, this would how it would be, we get in the paper and the radio and everything, and by the way, we even get an opportunity to talk about manure spreading at the same time. It comes with the food, or comes after the food. So they gave a very cautious welcome, but nevertheless they gave us the press. This with our key messages in simple terms. There we are, key messages. And not only that, but a few months later, they even went and put it in the Times editorial, where they themselves have now bought into the idea of eating less meat. How much less? For Britons, 40% less is the opinion of the Times. So this started with a message. By the way, when we started that work, the people in Geneva said, please don't work on that. That is too sensitive. We don't want you to work on that topic. And it moved to a gradual acceptance, and then get the publicity, and now with a national paper welcoming the message. So this discussion will surely go on much more strongly. And then you have the question, how much can we do in our cars and industry? How much in our diets ourselves? How much in agriculture? Now I want to come to the money, because the wages started with this, an acronym, just to join up. The wages are too much nitrogen, or as my colleague puts it, nitrogen waging war on the planet. And here is another angle of the wages, which is what's the money equivalence? And these are hard things to do in comparing the benefits and costs of nitrogen. And this is based upon willingness to pay. You can have a whole discussion about whether willingness to pay is any good or not. It's a difficult thing to do. But it's a way of putting these things together, showing that we've got high costs associated with water pollution, with ammonia pollution, with the NOx. This is the human health, this is the particulate matter, these are the ecosystems. Climate has got those warming and cooling terms. Remember, some was warming, some was cooling. And these are the net benefits to agriculture in its first stage, not the whole food chain. We didn't try to value the whole food chain. So we get big numbers. There's a real case for taking action. Again, the public are very interested, the newspapers are interested to talk about these numbers. The interesting thing is the politicians were not interested in these numbers. They, basically, will this affect our thinking when we go to Geneva? Answer, no. I think was the bottom line. And I guess what we should read from that is the politicians are saying, your respondents may well have been willing to pay, but we as politicians are not willing to pay. What we as politicians care about is what does it mean for the sectors making cars? Or what does it mean for the farmer? How can the farmer make money? That was their concern. So I've showed you this options document. We've then gone further with further advice. The framework code. Claudia Cordoville is somewhere here, has been taking a lead on mapping how that goes to the different countries and how far they've got. And we have a plan to go further forward with where we now join up that guidance across the nitrogen cycle. We started with ammonia. What will it look like if we join up the guidance between air, land and water? Back to the money again. So the politicians said they weren't willing to pay. This equation gives smaller numbers of money, smaller wages, but has got more traction with the politicians. So let's just take out of the ENA. We've got our losses to air, 8 million tonnes, losses to water, 5 million tonnes, losses N2, 9 million tonnes. 22 million tonnes of nitrogen is being lost out of Europe as a result of human activities. This is the component losses to air. If I just value that, not at a willingness to pay, but at the fertilizer price. So what are the farmers paying to put nitrogen on their field? That's $18 billion a year. And the agriculture share is 14 billion dears. This is much smaller numbers before. This is real cash. And the common agricultural policy budget of Europe is 57 billion. So that means that 25% of the common agricultural policy budget is lost up in Europe and down the drain as nitrogen. Or if you prefer it another way, since agriculture is 40% of the EU budget, that means this is 10% of the entire EU budget is lost as nitrogen up and spoke down the drain as real money. And this, you can see why this, even though the numbers are smaller, is more appealing, because then people start instantly saying, well, how many billions can we save? Which are the measures that are going to be cheaper to implement and start giving us savings? And that's a discussion we go forward now, I think, in the next years ahead. So let's finish. A few bottom line messages. So the world is hopefully waking up to nitrogen. One of the keys to that is getting the message in the press. And I would love to see one of you scientists having a press release, not the same person every week, but somebody has a press release every week on a new nitrogen science finding that gets nitrogen out there in the public domain. Do your science, work with your press officers to get your messages out there. Work out how you can package your message that will get a hook for the press to want to talk about your thing, put it in the newspaper. Because the more the world talks about it, the more we are forced as scientists to get the message they need and for them to think about what they do. The nitrogen's our daily bread and steak, of course. We're feeding ourselves with this, and the question is how best to do it. We've got all these pollution effects, the wages, societal costs of those big numbers in billions, but smaller numbers and yet 25% of the cap. And lastly, just to finish, I think circular economy is something we should be thinking about in the future. And that basically means we turn that nitrogen cascade into a cycle of money and economy and industry. So imagine all the climate technologies. What about all the nutrient recycling technologies which we should be encouraging in the future, where people can start making money out of better nutrient management, better nitrogen management, and of course we get our cleaner water, air, greenhouse, ecosystems, soils at the same time. Thanks.
I imagine that, thank you very much for your brilliant talk, Mark, and I imagine that must be some questions.
Hello, good morning.
Can you present yourself?
Yes. Good morning, everyone. First of all, sorry for being late, but at least I got to get a little bit of the summary of your presentation. My name is Carla Graça. I'm the Vice President of a Portuguese NGO, which is called Zero. We are 1.5-year-old, and it's zero because we aim for zero pollution, zero waste, zero loss of biodiversity, and so on. Zero climate change, of course. We've been talking about circular economy and dietary and food behavior in Portugal and in Europe, mainly regarding the less consumption of animal protein. One of the issues we are concerned about is, of course, circular economy and nitrogen and nutrients recycling. You talked about in water, but we have a problem here also, which is from domestic waste, because we have organic waste, which is not recycled. It's mainly going for landfills or incineration. And so we have also, mainly our cultural soils are very poor. We obviously, our farmers pay a lot for fertilizers, and so this component of introducing the waste from green fraction of the urban waste into compost and into incorporating in the soil. So the component of reutilizing or recycling nutrients also not only from water and wastewater management, but also from urban waste.
I think this is excellent, and let's have more of it. Let's explore the multiple technologies and get the different technologies competing against each other to see which one in the end can be most effective. I think the problem we face is that when you start down that line, initially it's not profitable because you're still developing your method and you haven't got it sorted out perfectly. So I think I'm not paying the bill. But since I'm not paying the bill, if you have climate subsidies to develop new innovation in climate science and climate mitigation and clean capture, storage and technology, etc., you should have similar investment in innovation in these nutrient recycling. Just one comment, a few comments. The nitrogen in food and the nitrogen in water pollution, sewage pollution, they offer an opportunity because they come in quite a narrow focus. So you could have opportunity for collecting well, but they're not the biggest flows. So the biggest flows are the manure in the livestock. Now then the challenge is, are these locally, can you collect them? And again, I think the thing with the manure is there's lots of opportunities. There's one in the Po Valley, by the way, where the nitrates directive says you can't put too much nitrogen on. So that forces farmers to pay someone to take it away. The person who's taken it away has just been given money and manure. And that is then creating a cascade for them to biodigest that, get some methane off, and then get the ammonia, strip off the ammonia, and then they put that back together with the acid to produce ammonium sulfate, which they sell back to the fertilizer manufacturers. So I think this is a great example of those kind of technologies which we should be really encouraging.
Any questions?
Yeah. Thank you for your talk, and also because you brought this communication issue to this topic. So the video far from the center as well. And for me, it was not clear if your message is, in one hand, you said nitrogen is really a complex cycle, but in the other hand, you said that it's more, we should sell it in a more simplistic way. Was this your message, or should we try to communicate it as a complex issue and not goes to the simplicity?
I would tend to say that you need several lines at the same time and be ready to emphasize one angle according to the audience. So here you are, you're a scientific audience. You get the complex and the simple, and then you can think about how to choose. So now you're in a meeting and you want to sell it to somebody, you have to think, who is the person I'm selling to and what do they care about? When I'm often in a stakeholder meeting now with policymakers, I think they care about money, so I tell them the circular economy numbers. But in simplifying, you will often, as a scientist, be criticized for simplifying. But I say, don't worry about that. Simplify, and then when somebody criticizes you, say, that's great that you asked me that, because now I'm very happy to talk about all the detail. And they've given you a second opportunity to speak.
Yeah. Jill?
So this concept of reducing our nitrogen consumption as people, how's that working?
I think I've seen some papers which say we're already at a turning point. Apparently, pork intake in France is going down, so somebody tells me. Not by much, let's say by 3%, whatever, but it's stopped increasing. If you look at, I don't know the numbers for Portugal, but if you look at Spain, the pig intake has just been rocketing. The so-called Mediterranean diet is a thing of history. The Mediterranean diet, where you have an awful lot of vegetables and a bit of fish and carbohydrates, and then a little bit of meat in it, has been replaced as more and more and more solid meat is increased. So, but some countries are beginning to turn, and the big challenge, I think, will be not just Europe or the US. You know, let's put it like this: if Europe, some countries, it'll probably be, I don't know, the Netherlands or something that leads this. If anybody's Dutch, I always think of the Dutch as innovative. Start leading the way. If they can show, yes, we're happier, we've saved money, we're healthier, and it's all great, why don't you do it too? And it becomes the cool thing, then other countries will move. But the big challenge is the other way, as many countries in the world, in Asia, are just racing for more and more and more. And of course, we need the poorest to be having better diets, but the danger is overshooting as people in maybe China, some of them end up with Western diets. This was for me a lesson when I went to Kampala in Africa. You were there, I think you were there. Oh, you were not there. We had a nitrogen conference in Kampala, and one of the things we do in our nitrogen conferences, we look at the diet issues. So we worked in Edinburgh with the chefs, and we said, we want you to cook with half the amount of food for this conference, half the amount of meat. And then I spoke to the chef, and the chef was very excited, the chef manager. And he said, first of all, I want to tell you I'm very annoyed, because my chef came to me with a new word, and I'd never heard the new word, which was Demetarian. I said, okay, that was in the papers, we got it in the papers. But secondly, they'd gone to 1/3 rather than a half, and they hadn't told us. And they were very excited, and the food was tasty, and they said they'd saved the money to put and make even nicer ingredients and make a nicer mix of things. So then we were at 180 grams per person. Then we went to Kampala, and we'd gone from 180 down to 60. So we go to Kampala, and we try the same. We think this is going to be sensitive here, because in Africa people don't have enough to eat. So how can we do this? Well, we did it, and they worked with the chef, catering managers, and we found out that the baseline was not 180, the baseline was 270. And we took 270 down to 130. One of the things we found out was that we had huge food waste. Even with that, the delegates were not eating it all. And culturally, of course, in Africa, it's a cultural thing to have really good meat as, you know, for your honoured guests. So it's not an issue then of averages, but an issue of social structure. There'll be some on very, very little and others on massive excess. So the challenge for us, I think, is to change action ourselves and talk with the rich and the rest and cascade.
Just to acknowledge that Jill Barron, that's coming from USA, will also give classes to the students. Could you present yourself?
Let me follow up just real briefly. In the United States, we've actually decreased our beef consumption, but it has nothing to do with nitrogen. That's a co-benefit of the fact that it's a human health benefit to have fewer fat and fewer meat intake, lower fat and lower meat intake. So whatever message works, I think, is the answer there.
And the other side of the coin, I don't know about in the States, but in my own country, chicken has been racing up. Chicken intake is going higher and higher and higher. And that is really important to think about from an economic perspective, because the chicken, you know, is partly this move towards white meat, thought to be healthier, but it's also cheaper as prices have come down. Why have prices come down? Because the whole chicken industry is on a bigger scale and operating more efficiently. So they have some of the highest nitrogen use efficiencies. But this is what economists call the rebound effect. I'm not really an economist, so anyway, but I heard the rebound effect. Basically, it says you improve efficiency, which means that you've got a cleaner system, but because efficiency draws down prices, you then increase volume of sales. So that's a real challenge as we look towards improving nitrogen efficiency, because it just means prices come down and sales go up. We're in a problem. So we have to consider both total consumption and the process itself.
Another?
So on a short question, do we have the cascade for nature? So I can imagine that nature is not 100% efficient.
For nature?
Nature, the forest, for instance. Do we have the same cascade you show us? Because nature also have heat meters and all the steps. And in order to compare the efficiency or inefficiency with our system, global system.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and maybe you can do a project on that. I really want to see the result. But for the simple answer, of course, nature contains many things. It contains those seabirds, the penguins. And when you've got penguins all together, they're feeding over a 500-kilometre radius and all coming back and pooing in one place. This is a really bad hotspot. In fact, we did it for gannets in Scotland, and we think we have the highest ever reported fertiliser nitrogen input, because on our Bass Rock Island we calculated that we are not putting like a farmer's 50 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare or 200 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare. On the Bass Rock, the gannets are producing 51,000 kilograms of nitrogen input per hectare. So this is really... And of course it's going up the atmosphere, down in the water. So, but that's an extreme case. In many situations in nature, if you've got a grazing situation or some herbivores grazing, when animals are grazing, solid liquid separation between the poo and the urine means the urine infiltrates nicely, and the poo doesn't contain so much mobile forms. When we have a farm and we put the solid and liquid together, we get the worst situation. And the levels are so much lower. So the key thing is that when nitrogen is in short supply, the microbes in the plants try to grab it back again quickly. So you can expect a higher efficiency of the system. But when it's in excess, that's when you start getting the big leaking.
Okay, I think we are ready for now. Thanks very much, Mark, for this talk. I think we can just...